In the late 1960s, the world watched something horrifying unfold. Not in Europe, not in Asia, but in West Africa. Inside Africa's most populous country, a brutal civil war was tearing Nigeria apart. At first, it looked like many civil wars do. A rebellion, a breakaway state. The southeastern region declared independence and called itself Biafra. But Nigeria refused to let it go. What followed was not just a war of bullets and bombs. It became something far more terrifying. A blockade. Food stopped coming in. Medicine disappeared. Millions of civilians were trapped inside a shrinking territory, slowly starving to death. Children died first. Their haunting images spread across television screens around the world. By the time the war ended in 1970, over 1 million civilians were dead, not killed in battle, but by hunger. And ever since, historians have asked a chilling question. Was this simply a civil war? Or did Nigeria's war turn into genocide? When Nigeria's green-white-green flag rose on October 1, 1960, the world saw a united giant. Inside, fault lines were already widening. 7 years later, those cracks became a bloody chasm. To understand why Nigeria unraveled so quickly after independence, we need to rewind half a century. In 1914, British Governor Frederick Lugard merged the northern and southern protectorates into one colony. It was a marriage of convenience. The north was largely Muslim, governed through emirs and indirect rule. The south was split between Yoruba and Igbo, with Christian missions and Western education undermining traditional rulers. Lugard kept the three regions, north, west, and east, administratively distinct. Each had its own lieutenant governor and budget. They shared little except a British flag and a railway line to move goods to the ports. National unity was not on the agenda. By the late 1950s, the pressure for self-rule was unstoppable. Britain drew up a federal constitution with 3 self-governing regions. On October 1, 1960, Nigeria became independent. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, leader of the Northern People's Congress, continued as Prime Minister. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, head of the National Council of Nigeria and Cameroons, became the ceremonial president. The coalition promised to balance North and South, Hausa Fulani and Igbo. There was pride in being the giant of Africa, but the regions retained significant autonomy, and underlying resentments festered. The North feared Southern domination. The South resented the North's larger population and slower pace of education. As one Lagos newspaper joked, "We are one nation, 3 countries." The honeymoon was short. A controversial census in 1962-63, widely believed to be rigged, deepened mistrust. In the Western region, a bitter power struggle split the Yoruba political elite. Violence erupted during the 1965 elections. Northerners dominated the federal civil service and military. Easterners controlled commerce. Oil was discovered in the Niger Delta, raising stakes over who controlled revenue. Foreign observers praised Nigeria's potential. Many Nigerians whispered that the Federation was a ticking bomb. On January 15, 1966, a group of young army officers, mostly Igbo, launched Nigeria's first coup. They assassinated Prime Minister Balewa, Northern Premier Ahmadu Bello, and Western Premier Samuel Akintola. Major Chukwuma Nzeogwu announced that corruption and tribalism had been overthrown. Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, the most senior officer and an Igbo, stepped in to halt the chaos and took power. Many Northerners viewed the coup as an Igbo plot. Almost all the victims were Northern or Western politicians. The Eastern Premier was spared. Ironsi tried to calm fears, but misread the mood. He abolished the federal structure and decreed a unitary system. For Northerners, it confirmed their worst suspicions. 6 months later, Northern officers struck back. On July 29, 1966, soldiers in Kaduna and Ibadan mutinied, killing Ironsi and hundreds of Igbo soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a northern Christian of the Angus ethnic group, became head of state. Chaos spilled into the streets. Between May and October 1966, waves of anti-Igbo pogroms erupted in the north. Mobs and soldiers killed between 8,000 and 30,000 Igbos and other Easterners, while at least 1 million fled south. The massacres were fueled by anger at the January coup and fears of Igbo domination. In eastern cities like Port Harcourt, there were retaliatory killings of Northerners. Gowon's government struggled to stop the violence. Refugee trains heading east became the symbol of a country coming apart. By late 1966, Nigeria teetered on collapse. In January 1967, delegates met in Aburi, Ghana, to try to save the Federation. Colonel Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, military governor of the eastern region, led the eastern delegation. Gowon led the federal side. They agreed to decentralize power. The Supreme Military Council would take decisions only by unanimous consent, and each region would control its own affairs. The meeting was hailed as a breakthrough. But back home, interpretations differed. Federal ministers balked at devolving authority. Eastern leaders saw the subsequent government decree dividing Nigeria into 12 states as a betrayal. Trust evaporated. As one Eastern delegate recalled, "We had a handshake in Aburi, but Lagos crossed its fingers." On 27 May 1967, Gowon issued a decree creating 12 states, effectively slicing the eastern region into smaller units and separating the oil-rich Niger Delta from Igbo control. 3 days later, on May 30, 1967, Ojukwu declared the independence of the Republic of Biafra. He argued that the federal government had lost its legitimacy by failing to protect Easterners and by breaking the Aburi Accord. The Eastern Region's Consultative Assembly endorsed the secession. Some saw Biafra as a last refuge from massacres. Others worried about the consequences of breaking up Africa's most populous country. Gowon saw secession as rebellion. He ordered a blockade, cutting off oil royalties and fuel. In early July, federal troops moved to retake the Niger Bridge at Onitsha. Biafran forces resisted. War broke out. Within weeks, the conflict escalated. Biafran troops struck westward, capturing Benin City and threatening Lagos before being halted at Ore. Federal forces then captured Enugu, the Biafran capital. What had begun as a political crisis was now a full-scale civil war. In the years that followed, hunger and disease would kill more civilians than bullets. But those tragedies belong to Chapter 2. The war began in July 1967. When Biafran troops crossed the Niger Bridge on July 6th, they moved fast. They captured Benin City and pushed toward Lagos, hoping a swift strike would force Nigeria to negotiate. For a moment, it seemed to work. Federal forces reeled. Foreign journalists wrote of a tiny state punching above its weight. But Biafra's early success masked critical weaknesses. Its army was under-equipped and outnumbered. Nigeria still controlled the air and the sea. By August, federal troops had recovered. They retook Benin City and moved on Biafra's capital, Enugu, capturing it that same month. Ojukwu relocated the capital first to Umuahia, then to Owerri. The front lines shifted constantly. Biafran ingenuity, guerrilla raids, homemade armored vehicles called Ogbunigwe, mass killers, slowed Nigerian advances. But every Biafran victory came at a price. Behind the lines, there were fewer and fewer resources. Nigeria's leaders realized they could win by starving Biafra rather than by fighting every inch. After capturing the coastal city of Port Harcourt in May 1968, federal forces cut off Biafra from the sea, closing its last major port. This was a double-edged sword. It prevented arms shipments from France and other supporters, but it also blocked food and medicine. The result was catastrophic. Over 1 million civilians, mostly women and children, starved to death. Kwashiorkor and marasmus ravaged villages. Photographs of skeletal Biafran babies with swollen bellies flooded Western television screens. Viewers who had never heard of Biafra now could not forget it. Biafra accused Nigeria of genocide. Nigeria insisted its blockade was a legitimate wartime strategy. The federal government made occasional offers of safe corridors, but each side distrusted the other. In the shrinking enclave, 14 million people crowded into a territory with no sea access and few oil fields. Relief flights by the Red Cross and church groups, flying at night to avoid Nigerian anti-aircraft fire, dropped powdered milk and antibiotics onto makeshift airstrips. Pilots called it the Mercy Airlift. It became the world's first large-scale humanitarian air bridge. The war's brutality and humanitarian crisis drew in outside powers. Great Britain and the Soviet Union openly supported Nigeria. Britain saw Nigeria as a key Commonwealth partner and supplied arms. The Soviet Union, eager to expand influence in Africa, sent weapons and advisors. On the other side, France, Israel, and several African states, Gabon, Ivory Coast, Tanzania, and Zambia, quietly backed Biafra. Some supported Biafra to weaken Nigeria's dominance in West Africa. Others sympathized with a Christian secessionist movement. Still others were attracted by potential access to oil. According to a medical aid worker, Biafra had formal recognition from 6 countries, informal support from 6 more, and financial aid from about 30 donor states and charities. Meanwhile, Western charities and church groups galvanized public opinion. Images of famine broadcast during nightly news segments stirred consciences. Donations poured in. Relief organizations such as Caritas, the French Red Cross, and the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, coordinated food drops. Physicians returning from Biafra, frustrated by the ICRC's neutrality, helped create a new organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. The Nigeria-Biafra War, one historian noted, marked a before and after in humanitarian aid. It was the conflict that pushed aid workers from silent neutrality toward outspoken advocacy. The war was also a propaganda battle. Biafra hired public relations firms to lobby Western governments and orchestrate media coverage. Nigerian diplomats portrayed the conflict as a fight to preserve Africa's most populous nation. In London and Paris, protests erupted outside embassies. The French Red Cross sometimes felt used. Humanitarian flights were exploited to smuggle arms. Meanwhile, both sides eyed Biafra's oil. The Niger Delta held vast reserves, and companies like Shell, BP, and Gulf Oil had invested millions. Nigeria's blockade ensured that it alone would export the oil. France and Portugal, by contrast, hoped that an independent Biafra might grant them lucrative concessions. Oil made the war more than a domestic conflict. It made it a commodity war. By late 1969, Biafra's territory had shrunk to a fraction of its original size. Nigerian forces launched a major offensive on December 24, 1969, breaching Biafra's defensive lines. Ammunition was scarce. Soldiers were hungry. Civilians were desperate. On January 11, 1970, Ojukwu boarded a plane to Ivory Coast, leaving his deputy, Philip Effiong, to negotiate surrender. 4 days later, Biafra formally capitulated. In his broadcast, General Yakubu Gowon announced that there would be no victor and no vanquished. His government promised to reintegrate the Igbo population and rebuild the East. It was a magnanimous gesture, but beneath it lay deep wounds. The human cost remains contested. Estimates of deaths range from 500,000 to 3 million. An article in the American Journal of Public Health suggests about 1 million civilian deaths, mostly women, children, and the elderly, plus more than 100,000 military casualties. These deaths were not just from bullets, but from hunger and disease. The famine in Biafra changed the way the world viewed humanitarian crises. It exposed the power of media, the necessity of impartial aid, and the danger of politicizing relief. When the war ended, the Nigerian government adopted a policy of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation. There would be no tribunals for Biafran leaders. Properties would be restored, scholarships offered. Yet many Igbos returned to find their homes and businesses taken over. A Biafran soldier recalled walking into his village wearing a patched uniform, only to be told to start again, as if nothing happened. For many survivors, the promise of no victor, no vanquished felt hollow. When Biafra's vice president, Philip Effiong, announced surrender on January 15, 1970, General Gowon spoke of unity and declared there would be no trials, no punishments, just rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation. The slogan sounded magnanimous, yet many Easterners soon experienced a different reality. Banks in the former Biafran region were ordered to give every account holder a flat £20, regardless of their pre-war balance. People who had saved for decades saw their life's earnings reduced to a pittance. A year later, the indigenization decree of 1972 pushed Nigerians to invest in state enterprises, but most Igbo families, impoverished by war and blocked from capital, were excluded. Meanwhile, a policy known as abandoned property allowed state officials in Rivers State to seize homes left behind by fleeing Easterners. Many Igbos returned to find their houses occupied and their businesses gone. These policies sat uneasily next to Gowon's rhetoric. Reconstruction projects focused on oil infrastructure. Little went into rebuilding devastated towns. And while the federal government built new states to weaken secessionist sentiment, eastern Nigeria ended up with fewer states and less political leverage. The message many survivors heard was, "Welcome back. Now start over from scratch." Officially, Nigeria wanted to move on. Unofficially, there was a concerted effort to forget. Writers from the region describe unprecedented pressure on Eastern families to quickly get over their experience of the war, fueled by the "no victor, no vanquished" mantra. Parents who wanted to name their children Echefula, do not forget, chose neutral names instead. Streets and landmarks were renamed. The Bight of Biafra became the Bight of Bani. Even history itself disappeared. In the 1970s, history was quietly removed from Nigerian school curricula. A decision Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka said was deliberate. They just did not want history to be taught, especially contemporary history. They don't want people to know and learn from our recent history, things that led up to the Civil War. He lamented that without confronting the past, new movements like IPOB and MEND would keep emerging. The silence created a vacuum. In villages across the southeast, people whispered stories of pogroms and starvation, but public memorials were discouraged. The federal government erased Biafra entirely from the national consciousness and cast the Igbo as rebellious troublemakers who were forgiven out of benevolence. Calls for reparations were framed as ingratitude. Annual memorial services for the war dead were often shut down by soldiers. Without monuments or school lessons, many young Nigerians grew up knowing little of the conflict that killed their relatives. For some, silence became fuel. Half a century after the war, a new generation of Biafran activists has emerged. The Movement for the Actualization of the Sovereign State of Biafra, MASOB, founded in 1999, organized soccer tournaments and protests to honor war veterans. In 2012, a more confrontational group, the Indigenous People of Biafra, IPOB, launched an online radio station, called for independence, and attracted support from the Igbo diaspora. Both groups claim their goal is to protect Igbos and secure self-determination. Demonstrations have multiplied, from Onitsha to London. The Nigerian state has responded with a mix of arrests and military operations. Operation Python Dance, launched in 2017, deployed troops across the southeast and resulted in clashes and accusations of human rights abuses. IPOB was eventually designated a terrorist organization. Far from disappearing, the idea of Biafra has become an online community and a rallying cry for those who feel left out of Nigeria's political order. At the same time, other regions voice their own grievances. The Niger Delta's militants protest oil exploitation, the Middle Belt fights over land and identity, and the North grapples with insurgencies. As one academic noted, the Nigerian Civil War left behind a barrage of discontent among ethnic nationalities. The promised reconciliation never addressed the underlying issues. The proliferation of ethnic militias, from the Arewa People's Congress to Bakassi Boys and Massab, signals deep state decay. Why revisit this history? Because forgetting hasn't brought peace. Families still mourn missing relatives. Landmines occasionally explode, injuring schoolchildren. Survivors carry mementos, pieces of earth from battlefields, faded photographs, to keep their stories alive. Biafra didn't just end in 1970. Its echoes are still shaping Nigeria today. And stories like this are exactly why history should never be buried. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video, subscribe to HistoryScrolls, and let me know in the comments what controversial history story we should uncover next. Because the past isn't dead. It's just waiting to be told. And here on HistoryScrolls, we tell the stories the world tries to forget.